So good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today. And I'm going to change direction or tact a bit, and I'm going to talk about cyber from a different perspective. So I am not a cyber expert, although cyber has been part of my professional career from about day one. It wasn't called cyber then. It was called many other things through my career. And so, in case you didn't read, my career started in the military, where I was a communications officer for the Army, and it's in transition into industry, where I continue to work on communications and command and control systems. So I say cyber is not new to me, but I'm not an expert in it. What I'm going to try to talk to you is about cyber from the decision, or from the perspective of those who have to make business decisions, which inevitably involve money, which has been alluded to. So there'll be some common themes you've heard from the previous four speakers. There might be some different perspectives because I don't come from the big businesses. I don't come from government. I represent more of the small, medium businesses out there. So before I start, I'll put a couple of disclaimers up. Number one, the company I work for does sponsor work at CIC. And number two is that my company does provide cyber support. Having said that, neither of these two actually impacted what I'm going to say, although they do kind of come together to form the ideas I have. So to get through this, I'm going to follow this introduction, or this format. Before we get started, I just want to, how many people here work in the cyber industry? Quite a few. How many people here are cyber academics? Even more. How many of you are actual decision makers in companies that have to spend money on cyber? A couple. So that's my perspective. And finally, before I get going, just out of curiosity, how many people in here are veterans or serving members of the Canadian Armed Forces, the RCMP, or other first responders? A couple. So I want to thank you for your service, because I think those of us who have served have a different perspective of cyber than those who didn't. But it's just, I like to acknowledge those people. So I came to the conclusion, or came to this subject today because my business ordered a review of our security, and to include cybersecurity. And the team went away and did their first level of analysis, and they came in and started presenting to the executive their findings and their recommendations. And as I looked around the table at my fellow executives, none of them had a clue what was being said. There was an absolute look of fear and panic and, WTF. And, of my executive team, I'm the only one who has an engineering background, the only one who has a military background. And even I got slightly confused. So I realized at that point that one of the challenges we have is that you smart people can't explain to the not so smart people what has to be done, why, etc. So that's the gist of my talk today. So a little bit of an introduction. First thing I say, and I think it's already been said once this morning, cyber is a business decision. It's not a technical issue from the perspective of industry, except the cyber companies, of course. It is an enabler to business, and it can be a corporate differentiator. It can also be an Achilles heel. It is the responsibility of everyone in the company, from the top decision makers, the CEO, the boards, right down to those working. And if they're all not in line, then we're in trouble. We are coming to the conclusion that every company is a cyber company, whether you like it or not. You are connected to the network in some way that makes you a cyber company because you're part of that greater infrastructure. The cost is not just financial. It often gets presented and we need X dollars for this and X dollars for that. But the cost is much broader than financial from a business perspective. And the most challenging part of it is all interconnected. Now, the cyber actors come in, the first thing they start doing like a couple of people did, throw up a NIST definition, then they talk about ITSG, then they're going to go on to a couple ISO standards, and then they're going to go back to NIST, and then the government of Canada is going to introduce cyber assurance, and again, the decision maker is just frozen. They don't know what to do. But that's where we are today, and that's how we sell this and explain this. So what are the realities? I'm not going to dwell on this because other speakers have already talked about it, but I took this out of the National Cyber Threat Assessment Report. The fact that I actually had access to it is slightly concerning. But obviously, as a previous speaker said, things are not getting better. Are they getting worse? That I don't know for sure, but they're definitely not getting better. And not only do they not get better, they get different every time. So every time I get briefed on cyber, it's something new. As a company that works in the defense area, we do get attacked on a very regular basis, but it's always something different. So that is where we are as a business. That's where, as someone said, 90-some% of Canadian economy is small, medium businesses. That's where they are. So this break is for me, not for you, actually. People in marketing thought it'd be a good idea, and I'll get a drink. Well, I do hope to have some time for questions at the end, as long as they're not difficult questions. But I will leave time for questions. So who is the decision maker, and what are they thinking about? So the decision makers will range, presidents, vice presidents, general managers, boards. And for the most part, even in technology companies, the decision makers will have a very limited understanding of the detail of the technology today. They may have known the technology from years ago, but they're long removed from the front line of dealing with technology. Many tech companies actually don't have technical heads. And then certainly other members of the board, financial, human resources, etc., are not technically inclined. I read a report earlier in the summer that talked about the Fortune 500 companies. I believe it said 5% of the Fortune 500 companies have a cyber person that sits at the executive board level. 5%. So it's people who aren't the experts who are making decisions. They're focused on risk, real and perceived. And perceived is a really interesting concept because just the fact that there might be a threat often translates into there being a threat that they have to consider. And someone mentioned we spent a lot of money. I bet we spent a lot of money chasing perceived threats and not focusing on what the real need is. And security is not limited to cyber. This makes it even more complicated. We deal with physical security. We deal with personnel security. We'll deal with supply chain security. And what we have found, and what I know my core customers in the government have found, is that these are all interrelated. But traditionally, they're dealt with in silos. And that creates overlaps, and even more scary, it creates holes. So one of the things that we have worked on is that we call it an integrated approach. I don't like that term, but trying to map out how you deal with the 4 or more categories at the same time. And I put the last one up because everyone talks about cloud, everyone talks about SaaS, and I gotta tell you, as a decision maker, it is a terrifying thing. You, the technical expert, come into the boardroom, and you lay out the threat environment, and you lay out how bad it is out there, and the next thing you say, I'm going to throw your data into the cloud. And then you wonder why you don't get a decision. Or I'm going to use a SaaS solution to do human resources, for example, which means all of our data, which we're legally obliged to protect, is being held by someone else. So you wonder why decisions don't get made. It's because decision makers are paralyzed because they can't get information that they need to do. So what are some contributing factors to this? Someone mentioned COVID-19. The reality is, in many business areas, We are forced now to a hybrid or a remote working environment. People talk about, the scarcity of cyber resources. I can tell you the scarcity of engineering and software programming resources in this country is terrifying when you look at the programs that we're trying to do. So if young kids want to work at home, guess what? They're going to get to work at home. But that creates a whole new environment, as already talked about. Internet's increased since 2020. No kidding. We all had to use the internet in 2020 if we wanted to interact with anyone in the world. But businesses also increase its use of internet significantly, and that's not changing. More and more of what we do is done on the internet, done remotely. The range of things we do is far greater. The number of in-person meetings today compared to 4 years ago, it's staggering how little it is. How many times I've heard people today and last night talk about, oh, I've only ever seen your head, in a screen of 16 heads. It's true. It's changed the way we do business. It's changed the way we do our interactions. And it all creates these threat vectors that terrify decision makers. Technology advances. I'm not going to talk to you about technology advances, but I am for just a second. As the technology advances, so does the avenue of risk. And again, decision makers don't know the detail, but intuitively, they understand that. And again, it causes this paralysis. So do I make the decision? Do I not make the decision? Am I making the right decision? And that then causes a delay, and delay, as you all know, then creates more opportunity for the adversary to do bad things. Further that challenge, I mentioned understanding the threat. You need to understand the threat in a way that makes sense to the business. So from a business perspective of the threat isn't that I have a ransomware attack. The threat is that I'm going to have a business cost, or I'm going to lose access to a system that is going to result from that. So things need to be explained to decision makers in the terms of what affects the business. What affects the business, like I said already, is not just financial. Reputation. Many, many businesses depend on their reputation, big and small. They worry about liability, right off privacy. The one thing that small businesses in particular are deathly afraid of, because they get hit with it all the time, is protecting the private information of their employees. It is an absolute requirement, and the government can be quite brutal to small businesses when they don't do it. And plus, who wants to work for a company who, next thing you know, your personal information is shared somewhere else? It's bad enough you fill out some form in a store and you get 1,000 spam mails. If you start getting that through your business or through your company you work for, your employer, you start to worry. Training. You're going to hear this word a few more times. You have to train your people that operate the system. You have to train your people that use the system. And unfortunately, it's not a shot and forget about. It's a continuous thing, and that costs money. You have to sustain your system. Like I mentioned, things keep changing, the threat keeps changing, technology keeps changing, so you're continually evolving your systems. Big companies have nice elaborate plans to how do they do that. Small companies, they just go, what do I need to do? And usually what I need to do is too late to need. And it's not just changing the technical layers. If it was just about technology, it might be kind of easier. But even a small company needs a policy. Small companies don't deal with policies very well, because policies can get out of hand, and the next thing you know, you have 10 policies that aren't connected, and there's disconnects or discrepancies between your policies. So it's bigger than technology, it's policies. How are you going to actually run your business? How are you going to do your transactions? They're all interrelated. And that's, again, what the small business is dealing with. And then there's a never-ending cycle. So I do my analysis. I look at my people, my process, my technology, and the threats. Guys come in, gals come in, they design a system. We say, yeah, we're going to spend X dollars. We build the system. We start to operate the system, and the next day they come back and say, we got to change it, because the threat just changed, or the technology's just changed, or there's a new government regulation, and we start all over again. And did I mention businesses make money? That's what businesses are for. That's just the reality of it. If you don't make money as a business, you don't exist as a business. And now I'm spending money. Money that could be used to pay shareholders, to pay myself if it's a small business that I own. And this process, this loop just keeps going, and it's not easy for me to decide, or the business owner to decide where to play. So mitigation, a great word that everyone keeps talking about. And again, the first layer of mitigation is you got to buy this firewall, and you got to buy this SOC service, and you got to buy this other thing, and then you got to teach the team how to use it, and then you got to make sure you have the policies. And again, it's this big circle. More complicated is the mitigation for cyber is part of the bigger business continuity plan and the business recovery plan. So all businesses, even the smallest ones, have some basic idea of how to do that. But this is a layer of complication that just goes onto it. I've mentioned policy. I won't go on that. Back to this affordable, sustainable IT. And the sustainable is important. I may be able to afford to do something today, but then can I sustain that for the duration of my business or that system? And I gotta tell you, people aren't very good at talking about sustainment costs. Very good at identifying this is what it's gonna cost us to do this, not how much it's gonna cost us every year to maintain that. So very important. The procedures, especially in a remote environment, developing the procedures that allow people to work productively in a somewhat encouraging environment is not necessarily easy, but you have to have it, otherwise everything else is for naught. And then training. And did I mention training? This is, in my mind, the biggest scare factor for many small businesses and the biggest failure. If you went back to one of the earlier slides that talked about, from the cyber assessment, it talked about actually most cyber attacks could have been prevented. And it could have been prevented through training. And you got to understand training from the business perspective. So you buy a training package. Someone might come in and do your training package, or it might be an online training, and we'll say it takes 4 hours. So I have to pay that employee 4 hours to do that training package. Well, while that employee is doing the training package, that employee is not generating revenue that I need to run my business. And not only do I have to do it once, but I now realize I have to do it over and over and over. And it gets very difficult. And then many small businesses are in a very cutthroat environment where cost is everything. If you can't get your costs down, you can't survive as a business. And how do I build all these training costs into my business process, my business plan? What gets even more complicated with people is people don't spend their whole day in their business. They spend the rest of their day in their own private life, where they're on their gadgets and social media, etc. And as all of you know, I make a mistake in my social world. That mistake can then translate back into the business world. So not only am I trying to train them how to use my business systems, and someone talked about conversations, I'm trying to convince them in a business manner that they have to behave the same way in their personal, private lives to protect our business. And I mean, one of the things that my company does do is these social searches for security clearances. It is unbelievably terrifying what some of you people do. And you get the smartest person, but many, many companies today now demand this as part of a hiring process. And you do something stupid, university, and you post it. It's there forever. And it's back to this, it's not just a business, it's in the personal world. And it's really hard. And that costs even more money and takes more time and is a greater risk. I was at a conference this summer. It was a military conference, and this general officer got up, for the military, who was my biggest customer, and obviously my background, everything is about cyber now. Well, it's not. It's about network operations, about dispersed operations, autonomous operations. But the reality is it's all about cyber. But They're very reluctant to say that. And so when this general officer got questioned about cyber, the answer was, pulls out a pencil and goes, well, how do you attack this pencil? This is back to the mindset of decision makers. This is a very specialized group of decision makers, but the view was a pencil can't be attacked, which arguably is somewhat true. But that's where we are. So people are all about it, the problem or the issue and the solution. Training, and it's not a one-shot training. It's a continuous training. And we're now starting to see developing a cyber culture. Not exactly sure what that is, but if it's this mindset where you need to always be aware of what you're doing because it comes back, it infects everything else you're doing and everyone else is doing, that's really good. Not just your own employees, but if you're a medium-sized business, you probably employ small businesses as subs. You have to make sure they understand. And I can tell you the big companies who have the big budgets and have the programs, they certainly try to make sure we do that. But everything, again, the interconnection causes everyone to try to make sure that the team is, or the system is secure. So I'll leave you that training's expensive. You can't do anything about it, you've got to do it, but understand that training is expensive. And anything you can do to reduce that cost is a benefit. And, I just changing subject slightly now. I just want to talk very quickly. We do sponsor a program here. It's a 5-year program working with CIC. And this year we're focused on cloud security. The milestones, the team is on milestone, just moving into milestone 3, I believe now. No, milestone 4. And what I've asked the team to do is take everything they were looking at from a cloud security perspective in an enterprise solution, enterprise network, and try to apply it to the disadvantaged networks that the military, my core customer, has to operate in. And there's been some very interesting discussions and use cases of how that works. Anyway, just a shout out because I don't participate in all the meetings or even any of the meetings, but I get lots of feedback. And my team loves working with the CIC team, and I think they're doing some pretty cool stuff. And with that, I'm going to leave with one final thought. And this is just how dynamic, or shows how dynamic the environment is today. So I woke up this morning to go to the gym. All the young kids I talked to last night, the importance of going to the gym in the morning, I was there. And I checked my email, which was probably a mistake. And my cyber dude sends me, he goes, I just got this report today from AT&T. So it came in, he got it yesterday afternoon sometime. And he goes, there's a couple things that he thinks that are important to what we're talking about today. So I wrote them down, because number one is that the report reinforces the idea that incident response to a cyber incident should be treated as a business issue, not just a technical process. Because sometimes you may decide to do nothing. And the second thing, which I thought was really neat, is building the bridge between cybersecurity and business mission and goals is a characteristic of those businesses who tend to be successful in this domain. So, thank you, Alfred, because I know you're online listening, but it does bring it together. So, again, thank you very much to the organizers. It's a pleasure to be here. And all I can say is understand when you really smart people are talking to those who need to make the decisions, and they do need to make the decisions, you've got to present it in a manner that they understand. And it's all about how it impacts their business, and their business at the end of the day is about making money. So if you can figure that out, we can get decisions made more quickly, and maybe we'll have a much more secure space. Thanks very much.